I now call to order the Parish-wide Drainage Liaison Committee meeting for Monday, November 13th. Roll call, Miss Kathy.
Yes, sir. Mr. Edgepont?
Here.
Mr. Ferris?
Here.
President Guidry?
Here.
Mr. Landry?
Here.
Mr. McMillan?
Here.
Mr. White?
Here.
Chairman Scott?
Here.
Everyone's present.
Thank you, ma'am. With that, I'd like to remind anyone, if you'd like to speak on an agenda item tonight, please turn in the blue slips in the back to Miss Jessica and silence any and all electronic devices. Mr. Beam. Item number 3, receive report from staff to summarize proposed revisions to Chapter 26 of the Code of Ordinances of Calcasieu Parish, Louisiana pertaining to drainage standards, receive any public comments, and take appropriate action thereon. Mr. Beam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This week and the next few weeks that follow are the culmination of a 3-year journey. This journey will set the future for drainage management in Calcasieu Parish. The decisions made by your committee and the full police jury this week and the week of the 2018 budget approval, which is mid-December, can usher in a new era that improves drainage in the parish for literally a whole generation. Very important. Tonight, the main item for your consideration will be a set of improved ordinances relating to drainage. However, we feel it's important to touch on all facets of drainage so you can put all of this in context. So I'm going to go over a few slides. I think I have 6. Alan will follow, and then we'll certainly any discussion or questions you have. Also, it's important, I want to make sure you all have the handouts. Be 2. One of them is the actual set of ordinances as proposed, and the other is just an assortment of things that we'll cover in the actual presentation. So, but if you have any questions on those, we certainly can answer that as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and go into my part of the presentation, and I see Tom has loaded it. Okay, it's important when we're literally talking about 3 years, and believe me, you say, well, why does something last 3 years? I could talk a long time on that, but it's been a good 3. And the main one is because it takes a lot of research and a lot of good input, and we've got it. I really want to commend the citizens of this parish, the groups that have met with us time and again throughout this whole thing. But I want to go back. It was actually about 2.5 years ago in the spring of 2015 when you approved, the police jury, the full jury, a drainage mission, principles, policy objectives, and operational and maintenance objectives. Because it's important to know if you're going to do something, you need to know what are you supposed to do, how are you going to get there. So that has guided us the whole way. I'm not going to go through all those, but your handout on the top sheet, not the ordinance one, but the other, it has all of that in detail. I do want to highlight the guiding principles because that's our touchstone all along the way, and I think it's important. It's really helped us as we've tried a whole lot of things and what we ultimately propose to cover these, and it's no accident the first one is protect existing property investments. That's residential, that's commercial, industrial. The people here already, those who have flooded, those are at threat of flooding if things are built that hit them, all of those, that's really foremost in our minds. We also want to be very aware and diligent about optimizing the capacity for economic growth. And what we mean there is certainly don't do things that are going to inhibit growth. The big cost we feel strongly about, though, in inhibiting growth is continued flooding. And if you're growing, that means it's good, but it's going to create more drainage challenges because you got more to drain. So that's been important. Impact from disasters, we need to reduce that. Protect water resources, that's, Alan has helped with that. That is, look at a watershed as something you got to treat very well. It's a very good thing, but if you don't respect what it provides for you, then you get in trouble. And so that's where that comes from. And the quality of the water as well. And last, but certainly not least, let's maximize our efficiencies. How do we, that's a lot more on the maintenance side and the capital side. Parish, district, cities, the whole works. But this has guided us the whole way. I bring this up a lot because it's in one illustration, it really shows the main points that we have to approach, and the jury ultimately in trying to get our arms around this whole idea of management of drainage. And we call it integrated because it needs to be all three. It shouldn't be 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3, it's all three. And I know the type's a little small if you're watching on this screen, but at the top you have the development standards, which is what is actually up for action tonight and this week by the various bodies. And each of these has a lot of spokes off of them, but this sort of is, in one graph gets you there. The bottom left is planning and projects. That's more commonly called. This is where infrastructure comes in. The capital projects, whether the detention, new laterals, widening, replacing culverts along a roadside, all sorts of things go into that. Modeling, the whole bit. And on the right is maintenance, which takes a whole lot of forms. And again, what Alan's going to cover later, I think will help clarify a lot of that side. He's going to focus more on the bottom two areas tonight because we want to paint that whole picture that we've been working on the whole time. And they're all important. So as I get to wrapping my part up, just a quick background on the actual ordinance drafts. In October 2016, right about a year ago, you passed policies, and I underline that because that's not ordinances. But it was critical because everything that followed that flowed into those. And Alan, as a refresher, covered that the November 1st meeting. But if you go back to those, everything we did after that and all the input we got, we made sure we kind of had it broken down in a little more of a higher level form, and then you get down into the weeds with all the detailed wording. Ordinances are that's the actual wording, so you have something to go by. Spent several months putting the ordinances together, getting input, and on June 13th proposed the first set, draft 1. Got feedback from that, from jurors, from the public, development community. Came back on the 8th for that. And then that's when y'all extended the process to allow more input and going through ordinances with different groups of folks. And so the most recent one was October 24th, presented to you as draft 3. Now, tonight, the 13th, there is a draft 4, but and Alan can explain it better, but there's very little has changed. There's really only 2 things. One has to do with the detention area next to a property line, and we're kind of easing that up a bit, and I think it'll be helpful. And the other is there's actually only a few, but there were a few things where we made changes to the existing ordinances today, but we went full circle and kind of added it, changed it, and it ended up, we recommend that it doesn't get added at all. So there's about, I don't know, Alan, 3 or 4 things that is actually not in the document anymore because we're saying don't change it. So he can explain those if needed. But in all practical purposes, what you saw on the 24th is the same thing with those 2 exceptions. But I'll let him answer that if you have a question. And so here we are tonight. On the 1st was last week. This is tonight, the 13th. What we're seeking is a recommendation, which I'll get to in a second. Tomorrow night, the Planning and Zoning Board meets to give their input on all this, which, because it's part of Chapter 26, Development Chapter. And then the police jury as a whole is scheduled to have this on your agenda this Thursday. So we're going to come back to this, but because it's ordinances, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, tonight, here's what our recommendation is. And let me just read it. We're asking that you approve a recommendation that the police jury approve the proposed revisions to Chapter 26, the Code of Ordinances relating to drainage standards as submitted this night. So what you have in front of you and what is, I think we're going to have it on our website tonight, is what we're proposing. We'll come back to this, but I'm going to ask if you'll allow Alan to cover the other parts, the maintenance and the capital, so that you have a full understanding of what all we've been working on and what's planned. And we will certainly go from there.
Thank you, Brian, and I'll just get started. Okay, so first we're going to discuss maintenance in detail, and then we're going to get into the capital. So that's just the order that I'm going to go in. And like Brian alluded to, the maintenance part is always been critical. So I think what we wanted to highlight was first defining maintenance. I think that's the first discussion is, because capital and maintenance are blurred now, and I think as we refine those lines, I think we'll understand how both units can work together. But maintenance, pure and simple, is to really just ensure that what we have out there is working adequately. So once we start improving it or enlarging it or upscaling it one way or another, we're moving off into capital. So just to draw those distinctions. Inside maintenance, we really have three components of the maintenance program that exists today. Both it would be systematic, response-driven, and of course disasters. If you're wondering what we follow as a guide to our maintenance program, most of your programs are centered around drainage and many things, especially drainage, I guess, and including the maintenance program is centered on FEMA guidance for the CRS program, which is basically a system and a point system where if you do maintenance and you meet those program activities, you earn points for the community. And if you do well at that, you can reduce insurance premiums up to 45% if you earn a maximum amount of points. So that's a very important thing for our entire community. That's why we model after that program. We're not perfect. I'm going to highlight a few things, but we do a great job. I believe the workers in Calcasieu Parish and your crews and your staff out there in the Public Works Department do a wonderful job. That is reflected in these numbers, I think. As you know, you have 1,200 miles of road, really a little bit more than that, and so you double that for the roadside ditch system that straddles it on both sides. So each year, systematically, we have between 14 and 18,000 annual systematic regular work orders, scheduled work orders, if you would, preventive in nature. I have a graph after this that sort of highlights this. Beyond that, we have a response-driven component, which is critical, 1,300 to 1,500 per year response-driven requests. Then the last is, of course, disaster preparation. If you really look at the graph, I'm going to show you in a second, when you ask the question, how does the trend continue upward? I was talking to Teresa, our assistant director, how do we keep this trend upward? How does it continue to go? And I'm going to go ahead and show the graph so I can talk about that a bit. The reason why that continues to grow is we have gotten much better in recent years in two things. A, the mowing cycles have been, we've gone to a new program, been able to mow a lot more than we used to. But B, we have taken on pre-disaster or pre-major event things that we used to never do before to any degree, but now we do them more than ever. So when we get a forecast giving us a couple days out of a rain event that we feel is going to be significant, our crews sort of stop what they're doing and they go to pre-disaster mode. It can be as much as a couple days, it can be as little as a day, but those do generate a ton of work orders in the way our system works, where they go into a mode of just clearing laterals and debris in advance of the storm, realizing that they may be out there later that night or in the event trying to do that. That debris that they're dealing with comes back continuously. I mean, our laterals receive debris every day from if it's trees or litter or dumping. There's a struggle there that's ongoing that doesn't really cease. So going into that mode pre-disaster is what I really can attribute the growth and then the trends. If you look at this graph, the last 2 years here, 2017, 2018, are projections. 2017 is not complete yet, but being pretty conservative for the last 2 months of the year, we feel like we're going to hit the highest numbers ever on preventive, what we consider preventive maintenance to the system, which is the mowing and the spraying, debris removal, and things like that. So keeping that trend going for 2018, that one's more of a pure projection if that was to go. So good numbers. It shows we're working on the front end of this thing, trying to keep your system in order. That's what FEMA wants to see. That's what we want to see, and we think gives us the best chance, for the rainy days and to do the best we can. With that, we still see response-driven problems that come up. Community this size and system this scale, there's going to be problems out there. So we plot those. This is just a map just to show you that each one of those requests are tracked, they're plotted. We look at them, we study them. Many of them turn into capital improvement priority projects. We'll talk about a little bit later. Some of these we can fix through maintenance efforts, but a lot of these are repeat chronic problems that I'm going to show you in a minute that, are hard to fix. Even if you want to fix them, they're hard to fix. So going back to the FEMA guidance a little bit, trying to define what good looks like, and this is obviously not a ditch in Calcasieu Parish, but it's what comes in that guidance manual of what we're looking for. And I put it in there because it's simple, but it works. You got a good ditch here with good slope, good vegetation. You got a low flow channel with really no obstruction. So it's not that complicated, but a good maintained ditch has a good stand of vegetation in it. It's not an earthen ditch that's going to erode and silt and do all the things that they do. So remember, when we're digging the ditches, and a lot of people, and you would get that request a lot, that's putting that ditch into a state where it's almost, it's not ideal at that point. That's putting it into a very sensitive state. So this is really what we've always been shooting for. If you'd asked Terry Baird, who was the father of our vegetation program, this is the picture he always had in mind of what our right-of-ways should look like with a good stand of vegetation on them, not impeding the flow of water, but yet suppressing the weeds and the things like that. So we do have our challenges here, and I wanted to highlight some. These are very recent pictures, so these are not dated and out of the file. These are the things we face every day. The first slide, I'm going to go left to right. The first slide is just obviously a chronic situation where we have standing water in a subdivision area. We have a totally rusted out culvert, and just, a problem here that I could tell you if we could fix it, it would be fixed. So what happens in situations, how do we get like this? Well, it starts with an inadequate design on the development. And then from there, it's encumbrances. So in a case like this, there's probably no outfall for this lateral, for this subdivision to drain to. Of course, you have sewer, effluent coming out of the homes in this subdivision that keep this ditch full of sewer, and the pipe is completely rusted out, which really points to a problem of who's responsible for a culvert that was put in years ago when there were no standards. Now it's rusted out. And who's responsible? Is it the owner there who now owns that place? It may be multiple owners since the time that culvert would be put in. Or is it the rest of the public should be responsible for this culvert? So remember, if you say Public Works should fix this, that means the rest of the public is paying for this repair. So there's an ownership and a responsibility there that we have to get through to improve the system, to know who's responsible when. This is an area where we can improve upon. The second slide on the right is an interesting picture because you can see the vegetation. What you really could, if you could focus on this sign says, "Do not cut or mow." And we try to respect that. There's sometimes some very valid reasons, health reasons exist out there. But when this type of approach impedes the flow of water around the system, it becomes a negative to the neighbors around it. So our team, our guys out there have to fight with this all the time, and it is a judgment call on what's best. But if you go, there's always scenarios where when you know the rest of the story, behind the story, I guess the thing I could tell you is there's none of our public works crews that wouldn't want to fix a problem if they could get their hands on it. They usually are handcuffed one way or another. This slide here on the left is Joe Miller Road. If you've driven down it, you've seen this for real. It's overdug beyond a depth that is safe anymore. It's that way to overcome inadequate design. You got a whole neighborhood around that area that just really wasn't designed in a way that provided for adequate drainage in the entire system. And when you try and overcome that through years of digging the ditches deeper, this is what you end up with. And I assure you, if any of them, I live up in this area, my mom lives on this road. If you wreck, you're going to need an ambulance and a tow truck there. That is not a good condition for our roadside ditches. We would like not to be going in that direction. On the right-hand side is silt from a construction site. I don't know where this is at, but this is very typical. If this all ends up in your ditch, is this poor maintenance or is this another problem? I would say it's another problem. We have to have a better approach to protecting the roadside ditches from the level of construction that we're under right now. Last set of these slides, the one on the left is an ideal ditch. It's manicured, what we consider a manicured ditch, but it can be a problem, especially if the person upstream of this ditch is holding water or can't get theirs to drain, which is a kind of a classic problem where one neighbor is pitted against another. And if we were going to go there to do what we needed to do, it would really require digging all this out, making it unmanageable for this person, but solving the other person's problem. So these conflicts exist in nearly every neighborhood, and our crews have to sort through what's appropriate for that, what's the best solution for that area each and every time. Last one is a picture just to show you that there's just a litany of pipelines and utilities in our right-of-ways that are oftentimes, at the end of the day, the Achilles heel to digging ditches deeper and wider. We don't have a lot of right-of-way on either side of our roads, so making them deeper means they just got to go straight vertical deeper, and they get unsafe. And when there's pipeline crossings like these, they either block debris if they're above the ground, or if they're below the ground, they basically limit your ability to dig the ditch at all. All those issues are out there, and so many times come into play with what stops you from doing a perfect job of maintenance. But our superintendents are used to dealing with this. They do the best they can. They make on-site decisions, and they go forward in a way that basically is the best for all involved. I have a list here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this list, but, you know, of course we fight with having a full allotment of crews right now in the working, just the market we're in. Ownership of the right-of-ways, I just described that. I really hope, the third bullet on our sewer effluent, I hope we can come back and revisit this issue at some point, and that the sooner we take that discharge from going into the ditches, I believe many of our ditches would actually become really, really nice looking ditches if we weren't dealing with this sewer discharge thing on really a parish-wide basis. You can see those there. The last one, though, is eliminate the inadequate design. And that sort of brings you full circle to why we need the ordinance changes. I think when it puts us in a bit of a unique position as Public Works, when we go out and deal with this many problems on a yearly and annual basis and look for those solutions, kind of puts us in a place where we can definitely say, look, guys, if we could design these better, on our end of the spectrum, we would have a lot less problems. And so I get to wear both those hats, but the guys that got to deal with this on those mowers and those gradles, they only get to see one side of it. They only get to see y'all take care of whatever's built. So let me just show you quickly some illustrations of how we know inadequate designs are out there, just another way. I've talked to you a couple times about the 2017 LIDAR data that has been, basically it's a new survey of the entire parish. If you look at this slide and you just understand it a bit, the red area is the high ground, the blue area is the low ground. In this particular subdivision, you follow all these little arrows around, it basically was all drained to the south road and then drained uphill to a state highway and down this way. Now you can see this in the LIDAR because if you look closely, you can see the ditches alongside the road. And they go from yellow, in this case, to blue, in this case, a darker blue. Tells you that ditch is basically on grade, draining the way it was all intended to drain by the design, but no one put in an outfall where it probably should have been, which is where Mother Nature wanted the water to go to. So the life of this subdivision, I can tell you, has been that we have continuously tried to overcome this inadequate design, because in this entire corner back here, it holds water. It's constantly festering with the sewers there, and everything's there, and you're constantly digging it out. The people who live here want us to come do more and more and more, and we try, but at the end of the day, you're fighting an uphill battle literally because of an inadequate design. Another quick example of how we're asking for new development codes and standards because we're building our own problems. You can see on this slide the bright red areas here. This is the high ground at the south end of the thing. This is the high ground. In between is the low ground. It's an old natural floodplain, 100 and 500-year flood are expected to happen here, yet we have this new development that really just comes in, and you can see it. I don't have to describe it. It obviously just eats up the storage and the conveyance in that entire system. So when we look at these LiDAR sets, this is just two examples, and you can go through the parish and see this. You see what we need to stop doing. So the first example was, let's design them right. This is just an example of why we talk about field mitigation so passionately and encroachment in the floodplain so passionately. Because imagine if we do this to the entire floodplain. What would we expect to be the result of that? It is going to flood a lot more. So that's why we need to sort of revise how we're doing things and get a hold of this problem and really allow the natural floodplains to exist and be there when we're going to need them. That's all on maintenance. Just to tidy this up with the capital program. We're, obviously fixing to present you with your budget. I'm really proud of this. This is really the first year where we're going to have a true drainage capital improvement program. Hopefully we will look back on this year as the beginning of it all. It's 1 year. It's $17 million worth of projects. The bulk of this is street level projects. Really, you could just use $6 million on each bullet there. It'd be close enough. The regional watershed projects, we have a couple of them that have already been identified, have been studied, they've been vetted, and everything that we know that they are good projects. We recommend going forward with them. We have some more studies in that as well. In the street level priority projects, probably each one of you have, if you remember the red dot map, y'all have some of those basically maintenance dots that have turned into what we call priority projects. Those priority projects range from $100,000 to $500,000 easily. There's a list of those that go throughout Calcasieu Parish where we're trying to solve essentially inadequate design problems, and it costs a lot of money to do that now on the back end. And then the road prep projects are really driving home that aspect of how do we get ahead of this problem and get ahead to a point where we're not just fixing areas that flood and areas that have already flooded. So we call it road prep projects. This system mirrors what Tim's been doing for years in the capital improvement road program where they overlay or fix your road. Is we're going to come in 1 year ahead of that program on the same set of roads, come in 1 year ahead of that program and do road prep projects, which would be, the idea there will be to move those road side ditches up to close to the minimum standards as we can. Where feasible, where practical, where doable. We know we'll hit a few places where, maybe no amount of money fixes a problem, but we're surely going to try. And that's where we tackle that. Now, that's a cycle that'll go through the parish systematically. So we feel like that's our attempt to get ahead of the whole situation at the road level. The priority projects are really an opportunity to catch up on known bad problems. And then the regional watersheds obviously are that group of projects that we feel like are large in scale and help the whole watershed to reduce the floodplain, not flood as much, and really just perform better on the big wet rainy days. So all this comes together. Really, a lot of people have asked us for the plan, and there's a lot of components to this. There's 3 main legs. But at the end of the day, I think from the beginning, I have thought that the very first thing that you should do is get a handle on well-planned growth and development so that you stop the bleeding, stop the problems from being generated, and then we're just going to try and build our way out of everything that's been sort of misdone to this point. And hopefully we can catch up and we can look back for this in years from now and be proud of this day. Just to show you, this is the updated map of those projects. We have a list that's behind this. The red lines are roads that are being looked at as the road prep projects. They go all across the parish. Red dots are priority street projects that are all known problems. Our engineering department has done plans for all these. We'll be passing it on to our consultant to finish the job and bid it out. And then, of course, the regional watershed projects. Many of these are studies of regional detention ponds. Some of these are clearing and snagging projects up in, Ward 5 area and the DeQuincy area. And then, the biggest projects in there are Louisiana Avenue project, and then we have one over by Country Club Road that we got a lot of growth in major road going in there. It's going to help out on that watershed, the part that sort of drains north. So we have a good list of projects. We look forward to the master planning effort that's kicking off now and really building out the regional projects as we go. So these are not Band-Aid projects. These are qualified good projects, but really feel like the blue dots going forward are going to be based out of the master planning effort that is now underway after your action. I think it was last week or so we got permission on that. So with that, we're back to the slide that Brian presented earlier. It's just we recommend moving forward with these ordinances, but I'll be more than happy to answer questions or whatever's needed at this point. That really concludes the presentation.
All right, we do have a few questions. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alan, could you touch on what you decided not to change and that you decided to leave alone?
Overall, or just in this last little group?
Just in the last group, yeah.
Ooh, of all the ways I was going to think of how they'd ask me questions, I didn't think of it in that order. What I wouldn't change, what I didn't change. But let me work on that a bit. So one of them, I'm just going to go through a couple of them as I can recall from memory. But one of the questions was, why have field mitigation and do things like that in the south end of the parish where, some of the flood zone down there is related to surge versus, river flooding. And, we haven't changed that, but I put on that one. That's sort of, we're still looking into some issues from FEMA, but it was a good question, but we haven't changed it. We're somewhat guided by the principles of the CRS program, what we should and shouldn't do so that we meet the standards of that program. If we can get from them that we're going to, it's okay to make those changes, it's not going to affect your floodplain or your rating in the system, we'll entertain that as we go forward. Really, I'm trying to think, I'm kind of drawing a blank on how you phrased the question. Maybe I can come back to that a little bit
Well, I think
later. What I
earlier,
didn't change.
Brian just
If you
mentioned
have
there was a couple of things that, you kind of went full circle and just made the decision to leave alone.
Okay, sewer's one of them, for instance. You jogged my memory on that. So when we started out, and those relate to some of the changes, we started out, we added some sentences in the original drafts to make sure that sewer discharge, effluent discharge from sewer systems didn't get into drainage features like detention ponds. Original drafts had some things about low impact development. You might have other types of things besides detention ponds, and we didn't want sewer discharge to get in those. So we put it in a couple places throughout the ordinance to be sure that sewer was not discharged into those systems. As we went through the process of Q&A on all this, it really just turned out to be that what we had wrote in there was a little confusing and you could misinterpret it. And that B, especially we didn't want to alter what type of sewer systems were already approved and when a certain type of sewer system could be used. Because the police jury already has ordinances on that and DHH has them as well on what could be used and when. We didn't want to mess with that. We just didn't want it to get through the drainage feature. So those are several places throughout the ordinance where we put it in and we took it all the way back out. So no change there really ever happened. But we went through the full cycle of change, then no change.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? With that, we have several speakers. Mr. Bean?
I guess I make a motion to discuss also. I don't
Yeah.
know that we ever had that, but
I think it'd be appropriate to have some kind of a motion before.
We have a motion to discuss by Mr. Landry and then a second by Mr. Anderpont. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, with that, we have 5 speakers tonight. We're gonna put a time limit of about 4 minutes, because I'm sure there'll be some questions along the way. So with that, we're gonna start with Mr. Tim Flavin, APG. All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Charlie Atherton.
I'd like to be last. I'd like to hear the rest of the
Not
discussion.
everybody can go fast.
All right, well, I don't know if you'll get last. You'll be second to last if Mr. Flavin chooses. Give me the next one. I'm gonna stick in order. I'm pulling them. Mr. Jakobzak. I just roll them in. I roll them back around.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman, members of the committee. For a point of clarity, I think it would be most efficient if I might respectfully request that Mr. Beam or Mr. Wainwright detail exactly what has changed since the last draft. I think Mr. Landry just got at that, but I don't know if those 2 responses were in totality. Can we hear that before we comment?
Yeah.
Mr. Wainwright.
Okay, so I was not able to answer what hasn't changed. What has changed is really one sentence. The only real change to the ordinance since then was in the detention pond section, in the design section, the way your old ordinance was written, you had to have a 6-foot top of embankment at the top of your pond, and really that 6 foot had to end up inside your development. And we had offered some wording to where a new measurement that had the number 25 in it and the word buffer was used, but it was measured from a different point. We thought it would be easier, but it only was confusing. So we went back to the original language. So we just went back to what basically, when it comes to the 6 foot that you've always had to have, and left it in there. One reason why we're confident in being able to do that is, though, because, you know, in the older way of doing things, the pond had been being tucked in the back, and it's not treated as an amenity. In the future, I see these ponds moved into the center of the development. They're gonna be lakes versus ponds, and they're gonna be amenities, and that need for a buffer, if you would, is really a little less of a problem. They were sticking these on the back property line by a fence, and so the back neighbors to these ponds were having trouble. I think they're gonna move them into the middle. They're gonna use them as how everyone else does it, and it's not gonna no longer be a problem. And so I think using the 6 foot number that we had will work just fine. So we just made that last little change just to avoid discrepancies. After that, the only other changes between ordinance 3 and draft number 3 and 4 are sentences that have made it, like Brian and I described, full circle, where we had added it in probably 1 and 2, but in 3, shown it as deleted. So now the draft that you're looking at is the final draft that has to go to the records office of what has really changed and what hadn't. And so those sentences that are words that have been added but re-deleted are totally gone now. And there was a handful of those they're in essence all good changes for, you know, the development group that wanted some things taken out of. All those are changes that we pulled out relative to those questions that they asked, and, you know, I think they'll be happy with those.
yeah, that's good. I may not have been clear in my question to begin with, but you answered it. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Jakobzak.
Thank you for that point of clarity. Chairman and members of the committee, I remain optimistic that some of the items in the ordinance that APG, Alliance for Positive Growth, feels they're incomplete have been addressed. And I think a couple of those were just touched on here. Specifically the 25-foot buffer, it's now not described that way. The ordinance in form number 3, the language read as if a property line couldn't be within 25 foot of a detention pond, which would suggest that a developer would buy the property or a landowner would develop the property and then had to create the detention pond and then had to have 25 feet that he couldn't otherwise sell to a lot owner. Save for review of the revisions, I think that sounds like one of the at least top 6 incomplete or unacceptable portions of the ordinance has been addressed. So I thank the staff for working with the public on that issue. I think you're going to hear in a moment from a member of the task force that the Alliance for Positive Growth asked to assemble and review the ordinance. The group, as you know, is made up of engineers, developers, mayors, other community leaders who have a vested interest in the language of this ordinance. And so you're going to hear from Mr. Michael Hankins with regard to some of those pieces that we think are still incomplete or humbly request that they be revised. They're simply, if they're not revised before Thursday, there's simply too many unknowns in the ordinance. I think you all are familiar with the concept of the American public being frustrated with things being passed, ordinances or laws being passed, only to learn of the details later. And we think that that still exists in this ordinance. We feel that the people of Calcasieu Parish would rather know in detail what is being passed before it's being passed. We think that that would best allow the parish to be able to say, how can we help, as opposed to the opposite of it being harder on permittees. To give you an example of that, I spoke last meeting of 8 issues with the ordinance. I think the task force has it whittled down to 6, and now I think it's 5. But I suggested at the last meeting that I presented staff with a list of those 8 with concerns and recommendations. And I've received a very detailed response, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs per each item from staff. And I went through it, and the telling part about it is that I highlighted on the 8 pages, they responded similarly with mine. 20 spots, 18, 20 spots, where we used words such as will be, ... expected to be, willing to consider, intended to be, may influence, to be dealt with, can be utilized, are not intended. All those phrases are in these answers. And what that suggests to me is it's unknown. It's not finalized. We don't know the details. And so that's our only ask. You guys, I commend the parish and the staff for issuing a request for qualifications, and I think they've selected what they call a world-renowned group to review the watershed and the watershed management plan for the parish. We think that some of those things that we could learn from those world-renowned professionals could help us fill in those blanks in this ordinance and let the people of Calcasieu Parish know exactly what is being passed. I'll save any. That's at the end of my time. Again, thank you for your time.
Any questions? All right. With that, we move to Mr. Michael Hankins. Name and address for the record, please.
My name is Michael Hankins, 419 Alamo Street, Lake Charles, 70601. Appreciate the time tonight. I'm part of the. Okay, that's fine. I'm part of the Calcasieu Parish, or the Drainage Task Force that was put together by the Alliance for Positive Growth. And first, I'd like to thank the staff here, Alan and Wes and Brian and Tim all came to several meetings. We spent a lot of time, a lot of private citizens spent a lot of their time trying to get to the bottom of the issues. We've gone back and forth with several issues, as Bart explained. And a lot of those issues have been resolved through answers from the parish and have also maybe been resolved through changes to the ordinance. So overall, it's been a very good collaborative process. And I just wanted to touch on the few remaining items that we feel are real issues with the language in the ordinance and some suggestions on some of them on how we can fix that. So the first issue we have is the fee in lieu of drainage. You know, the primary concern is an individual building a 2,000 square foot house on an 1.5 acre lot in an inexpensive area, maybe their first home. They've got a driveway and garage, and they've got 6,000 to 7,000 square feet of impervious cover. They've got to write a $1,500 check to the parish to build their house, the way this ordinance is written. We feel like single-family residences in the parish should be exempted from those qualifications as long as their impervious cover is under 8,000 square feet. So if someone still wants to build a 12,000 square foot house, they of course would have to pay for it. But we feel like that's something that should be done. We're concerned a little bit about the developer request for waivers. There are 3 instances where there's a developer request for waiver. One of them is if the project is under 2 acres. The other is if the project is under 20% impervious cover, and the third is if you don't change the main dynamics, I guess, of the topography of the land. The first 2 we think are objective items, and there shouldn't be a request for waiver. It should simply be if your project is under 2 acres, you move into the process. And the way this is written, you have to request a waiver, which is then granted supposedly, or perhaps not granted. I'm not sure exactly what the reasons for those would be, but these are the types of things. Well, all we're trying to do is to not slow down development or increase the costs in manners that don't help in any way. And we feel like that's one of the items that will slow things down unnecessarily. Third, let's see. Right now, there's no method for actually collecting the money if you get this waiver, and there's no method for how this money is spent. This is one of the items that Bart was talking about that has been told to us that it will, will come and something will be done in the future. We'd like for this fee in lieu of drainage to be figured out and to be passed along with this drainage ordinance. Okay. Oh wow. Inspection scheduling. We're concerned about there is no recourse if the parish doesn't get out and do an inspection on time. In our opinion, if they're not out in 5 business days, then they should forfeit the right with that inspection, knowing that there's still as-built plans and engineering certifications that will, ensure that things are built properly. I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit here. The drainage buffer was obviously an issue, which we've discussed, and I think we've come to a good resolution to. I appreciate that. The slopes in the easement areas, we've got a 3-to-1 slope currently, which is adequate for drainage and for maintenance and all those things. We still do not agree with going to the 4-to-1 drainage easement slope on the drainage easements. We think 3-to-1 is adequate, along with the expansion of the easement areas at the top of the bank and the outside of the easement areas. We feel like those are a little overly burdensome, although the minor moving up from 5 feet to 10 feet seems reasonable to us.
Okay.
It's your time, but I'm going to let you keep going. We like the specifics, so go ahead.
Okay. I'll kind of go back to the ones I skipped then.
No problem.
I've had this conversation before, I believe, with both Alan and Tim, and they disagree with me, but we're going to go ahead and put it out there. On the final plat, there is a requirement to have an engineer's letter stating that the project is built as per the plans, along with a set of as-built plans. Our opinion is that if an engineer states that the plans are built as per the construction plans, then there's no need for as-built plans. This is another one of those areas that we're concerned that there will be an additional cost for, no reason that is helpful. If we've got the construction plans and a letter stating that it was built per the construction plans, the as-built plans will essentially be the same thing. And, there will be obviously a charge from an engineer from that standpoint. So that's another item. Let's see. The last item is another one that Alan actually touched on. It's that coastal flood issue. And so, we struggle with this along with the staff because we understand that, some items, some areas in lower Calcasieu have both coastal flooding issues along with possible river flooding issues. However, there are a lot of areas down there that are not near any kind of drainage laterals or out in the middle of the country or in the AE flood zone. where fill mitigation just doesn't make a lot of sense and adds a ton of cost. And so one of the recommendations or the thoughts we had is that perhaps what we could do is we could put off the fill mitigation requirement in Zone AE until the Finster Maker report comes back and possibly has something to say about, where a line could be, or they could do, a study to show us where there's risk of inland river-type flooding versus coastal flooding, so that we can eliminate those areas for the need of fill mitigation, as it really would serve no purpose in an area that's not at risk of inland river flooding. So those are our issues, and more than happy to answer any questions.
Who do you have? Mr. Barris?
Thank you. I liked, one thing, I liked a lot of what you said. Well thought out. One of the things that jumped out was what's the possibility of having a threshold before that fee kicked in, like on the 8,000 square foot threshold of impervious, just for the one-off guy who's just trying to get going. Is there any shot at that, or talking about that, or reasons for why not?
That's what put you where you are now.
Well,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Wainwright.
All right. So that fee in lieu of detention is a really good question. We've had a lot of discussion over that. And I think, like we've described a couple times, you can have basically a very simple system, which is what we drafted into this ordinance, which is the basis of that system is everyone who creates an impervious square foot out there should participate in the mitigation of that. So if you're adding square footage, then you're adding to the runoff problem regardless of where you're at, and you should participate in dealing with that. So that's the basis for a flat fee that either you're doing on-site detention or you're paying the fee. If you want to build a strata in there for some exemptions like that, you see those types of things in other places, and it is possible. I would sort of just suggest that if we make it too complex, it's going to be that much harder to get through the permitting process and figure out who does and who doesn't. Okay. If you go with limiting it to, say, residential is excluded from that process, that's surely the jury's option, something you might could give us some guidance on. But let me remind one other thing on that before I close out on that one is any new subdivision now that is built, it would help in one regard, because a new subdivision that's built to the modern standard today would not need to pay this fee. So keeping track of all this is going to be a bit of a problem. As I've gone through this entire process, there's the part of me that says everybody should be accountable still exists, but the part of me that said let's keep the system real simple. At the end of the day, might just say, look, go ahead with this residential exception. It's not going to change the fundamentals of your capital improvement program that much, and we can find another way to get the citizens who are building homes involved in their watersheds and realize that there's things they can do. But I want that to be y'all's call. It's just a matter of just trying to be as fair and honest as we can and have a system that works for all.
thank you.
Done, Mr. Barris. Mr. Landry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The whole problem is the cumulative effect. And if you choose not to build a house, then you're not going to pay. If you don't do it that way, the guy that's not building anything and he didn't add to the drainage problem, he's paying to fix it because the other guy didn't pay. He got off with his exemption. That's not fair.
Okay.
That's my opinion. I respect yours, but I think that is where Alan's trying to get. You could argue about that all night. But to me, that's the fairest way. If you choose to do that, honestly, I think the fee's not enough.
Well, the fee is really, we'll find out, others will find out this fee is actually very low. It's a good low fee. I want to clear up one other thing. When Mr. Hankins was going through that, we do have a system in place to collect it. It'll be right at the building permit phase. Happens all the time. So the system to collect it's there. And our recommendation on how to use it is definitely in the watershed on regional watershed projects, obviously.
Is that in writing of how we're going to spend that money?
The collection of the fee, I'd say, is standard operating procedure.
Right,
In
I'm talking
writing
about how
of
the
you
money's going to
spend
be
it.
spent.
Yeah, I think that could be in writing. That's not something you write into ordinance. I think that is police jury
Be a
policy.
policy, yeah.
But that's,
Well, we definitely would want to make that policy prior to, and my intention, and I think everybody's, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but without a doubt, that money is going to be spent on drainage projects.
yes, sir, that's what it's.
I know that's y'all's intention, but we just need to get it out there and
Yeah.
make sure that that's part of the policy prior to that ever being put into effect.
Good, Mr. Landry?
For now, yes.
Mr. Barris, did you have a?
Just point of clarification, I think I was asking for a little bit more behind the thinking, and I don't think I made a stand either way or the other. If I,
And I'm not either. I think it's a good discussion. It's really, like Chris said, you can talk about it all night, the pros and cons of that exemption and having a system like that.
thank you.
Mr. Hankins, if the committee wouldn't mind, I do have one question. Sure. When you're talking about your final plans, as-built plans, or letters saying that it's final built, which one of these do you want and which one don't you want?
Well, we certainly agree that if something has changed, then a set of as-built plans is necessary. Our contention is that if you have built the subdivision or whatever it may be per the engineered plans that were approved on the front end, that's simply a letter from the engineer stating that the plans have been, or the construction has been done per the plans, then that should suffice rather than adding an extra layer of a new set of as-built plans that show exactly what the construction plan showed.
All right, we'll talk to Mr. Connor. You want to, Mr. Connor?
Scott, I'd be glad to try and address that. If there's no changes to a set of plans, then the plans obviously don't change. So it would just be a matter of taking that same set of plans, stamp it as built, as the official record that we have that goes in a file that says that these plans, there were no changes made. So it's just 5 minutes to take and stamp it as built, submit it with the letter, and that's all there is to it. If there are changes, obviously then those changes would have to be signed and sealed by that engineer of record and approved before we could approve the change in the field. And that would be reflected in those plans. It also would become a plan record set at the end, so that when we go back, we're not pulling the old set of plans, but we'll be pulling up a set of plans that says as built, and we'll know that that was the last record of that development. So it's not complicated. I think it's just misunderstanding of the procedure. But if there's no changes, plans don't change, just stamp those existing plans as built. And it's just that simple.
Kind of like the fire marshal. He don't let me get away, but I changed it, don't sweat it. He wants to see it again, wants to make sure it's right. That's just a statement, not a question, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
You want to let Mr. Hankins respond right quick?
Yeah, just real quick, and it's just an area of disagreement. I certainly understand what Mr. Connor is saying. However, in my experience doing developments, that is not simply a stamp and a return. It's generally a stamp and a return and a $1,500 bill, and that's just the reality of the situation. So that's why these things, that's why we feel it's unnecessary.
Can I ask you a professional question then?
Yes, sir.
So the $1,500, was it on the engineer who didn't design it right, the contractor who's building it different, or, because there's a lot of issues that can come, so somebody's got to be responsible for the $1,500. It's not the parish, is it?
No. What I'm saying is that even if the plans don't change, to stamp it as complete and to reprint another set, you're going to have fees for that, even if nothing changed, and there's a letter saying, this is as per the plans. To get a new set of plans, even though it's the same thing, I hear you, I understand it should just be, here it is, but it just doesn't turn out that way. And from my perspective, I don't understand the value in having another set of plans when you've got a set of plans that say the same thing and a letter from the engineer saying these were built as per the plans.
Okay, thank you.
Did
Mr.
you
Landry?
say another
Oh,
set of plans, or just a letter saying that plan has not changed?
It's the same set of plans stamped as built with a letter.
Just-
That says nothing
Same set
changed.
of
This
plans,
is the
not a
last
new
set.
set of plans.
Not a brand-new set of plans, just taking the existing plans,
Stamp.
stamping it as built.
Yeah. Does that clear that up?
It's not a new set of plans in that there are no changes to it, but it's a new set of plans in that there is a stamped as-built plans, reprinted, resent out. I understand it shouldn't be a cost, but it is.
We're getting to you in a few minutes, Mr. Lewin. We'll follow up. Mr. Landry?
I just got a comment. If I was the developer and I got a bill for $1,500 for that, that guy wouldn't be doing engineering work for me anymore. And believe me, I think that'd take care of that. Mr. Connor, would you hire an engineer that did that to you? That you knew all he did is stamp and he sent you a bill for $1,500? I
No,
don't
sir,
think
it
so.
shouldn't take me just a few minutes.
I wouldn't either.
All right.
If you get,
Any, Mr. Connor, you done?
well, I was gonna say, if you're gonna do a letter, that letter will take longer than it will to stamp those plans as built, so.
All right. So, any other? Thank you, Mr. Hankin.
Sure, thank you.
All right, we move to Mr. Ralph Lewin.
And of,
Name and address, please.
okay,
Hey, Ralph, let me ask you a question so I don't own your time, okay? Tell me about the stamping of an as-built plan.
okay, that's what I was gonna do. Mr. Connor is right, they're both right, okay, to a point. But Mr. Connor is right, because when we build a project, okay, we start out with a set of plans. At the end of the project, we have to turn in a red line set of as-builts. Now, we don't have an engineer do that. I mean, my staff does that. As we lay a pipe across a site, if we had to move that pipe 3 feet because there's a piece of conduit there, then we measure it out, we mark it, and we keep a clean set of plans that we redline and show the exact location of that pipe. If we've had to move a building 2 feet, because there was something else obstructing, we redline the print to show that. So at the end of the project, we turn over to the client a clean set of plans that are redlined and sometimes multicolored, just to make it easier for them to tell where, what has changed and what is original. And that redline set of prints is then rolled up and put into archives. We make a duplicate that we roll up and put on our set of archives so that, if somebody comes along later on and wants to know something, we can roll it out and look at it. And that's what Mr. Connor's talking about. I don't feel like, I've never had to have an engineer or an architect, approve my red line set of plans. They say, this is it, and this is it, because we're the ones there doing the work. We know where it is. And so, that's, so, I think a red line set of plans at the end of a project, whether it's a subdivision development or a new building or whatever, it's important. He's definitely right that it's important because you have to know what's there. I don't think that it's a necessity to have it stamped by an engineer. I think that, if the project developer he's signing his name off of it, he's assuming the liability that, hey, this is where it is, and at the end of the job, it's certified that that's there. That's it. I mean, that's how I've done it for 40 years. So.
Satisfied with that? I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. How confident are you that all the other contractors in this area do as good a job as you do? And should we just roll out the red carpet and say, Mr. Lewin said this is the way it happens, we're good with it?
Well, no, that's a good question, Scott. I mean, because, I feel like we're the best of the best, and I'm sure you've done some of this before, so you know that some guys don't really care, but, I've done a lot of work for the parish, done a lot of work for the school board, do a whole lot of work across the river. I do a lot of private work, but the architects and the engineers have always, in our monthly meetings, we go over and make sure that we've stayed up with the red line prints. I mean, there's a lot of liability that goes with this. I mean, a developer can't never, abstain himself from his responsibilities. I mean, gross negligence goes on for a long time. And so I would like to think that most of the people that I do business with and that are in this circle, that we're good, capable people. And I believe in honesty of everybody until somebody, proves me wrong. So in relation to your question, there's engineers that'll stamp a plan and won't even look at it. I mean, oh yeah, I can do that, boom, and go on about it. So, I mean, it goes both ways. Mm-hmm. You can only go so far. And if a man's a crook, he's a crook. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, that's just as simple as that. We got to see the honesty in everybody.
All right, with that, 4 minutes, Mr. Louie.
Well, no, wait, that 4 minutes was on y'all.
Yeah, now you start.
I get to start
now.
now.
You start 4 minutes. That's right. You start now.
Thank you.
When you say the first word, he'll start the clock.
Okay. Well, one thing is, I have a full-time job, and I know all you guys have a full-time job. I mean, being a police jar is something that you did because you wanted to do it because you wanted to do something good. Okay, I mean, I don't have any desire to be in either one of y'all's positions, okay? So, I mean, we're all here on the same note. We're all here because we want to create something better for Calcasieu Parish. And I respect each and every one of the people in this room, staff, you guys, and everybody else. There's times that we have issues, and we have our issues when we're discussing these things, but at the end of the day, I respect everybody in here and the time that they put, whether I agree with it or not. And, probably before this is over with, we're not going to agree on a lot of this, but I still respect you for what you do, and I want y'all to know that with sincerity. And on that note, that all y'all know that how hard I worked with Ward 3 Recreation to get that started, to get that moving and get that going, and that's been a proud moments of my life. I think that is one of the best governed and the best run organizations in the state. Parish does a good job too. But when I got involved in APG, and when I got involved in the drainage issues and the flooding issues and the catastrophic flooding issues we have in Calcasieu Parish, I took on the same passion and feelings that I had for developing Ward 3. I wanted to see this through and make sure that at the end of the day, that when we signed off on this deal, that we were doing the best thing that we knew was for the people of Calcasieu Parish. Now, the last 3 months have been grueling for everybody. It's been grueling for staff. It's been grueling for APG. I mean, they've grinded out a lot of stuff. We've grinded out a lot of stuff. They've had to pull out archives that they hadn't looked at 20 years. I mean, but are we close? No, I'd say, we're much further along than we were before. But I cannot say that I agree 100% with this ordinance in the state that it is now. I think that the ordinance is needed. We've had multiple discussions about the sins of the past, and y'all know that. I mean, there's not a person here who won't agree that the sins of the past is what's created a lot of this. And that's what we want to move away from. But we got to make sure that we move in the right direction. I mean, a lot of money's been spent on prior studies, getting ready to spend a lot of more. I think that one thing that's come out of this is that staff has learned a lot, we've learned a lot, but more important than anything, we've learned that there's technology out there that far exceeds anything that we've had here before, and that technology is going to bring a lot of new answers. And I think that technology is going to be, the results of that is going to change the dynamics of the way we do business in this parish when it comes to developing and when it comes to drainage, when it comes to flooding and catastrophic flooding. And that's where I'm at on this. I just don't feel like we're ready. I think that there's still some fine points that need to be worked out. I hope that you guys can understand that we're not here to create dissension. We're here to really solve a problem. And that we represent a large group of people too, and we're hearing it from them. They want something done. But they also, they want to make sure it's done right. And I think we're very close. And I think that if we continue moving forward and we can get the information that we need, that all this can be worked out. But I don't think we're there yet. And right now, that's all I got to say. I mean, I just wanted to bring those points forward.
All right, any questions for Mr. Lewin? Thank you, Mr. Lewin. Mr. Charlie Atherton.
Charlie Atherton, 122 Vine Street. I don't believe anybody disagrees that something's got to be done, and not against ordinances, but like everybody else that I talk to, I don't think we're anywhere near there yet. I do have a question, though. Our current drainage, my question is, how many year event is our current parish drainage system designed for? I mean, we're designed for a standard today. What is it? How many years?
10.
5 years? 10 years?
Mr. Wainwright, you want to take it? I think it's not specific enough question, but I'll let you try to answer what you asked.
I'd have to disagree with Charlie, number one. When you define our current system, number one, there's many kinds of components in that system, all varying degrees of design if you were to start them over today. So a system is not designed in totality for one number, one event. It varies relative to the priority or how strategic of the component that you're designing. So the detention pond is going to be designed, it's a more critical component than a culvert down the street. It's going to be designed to a higher standard. So number one, it all varies. And then here, like everywhere, we have 50 to 100 years of growth that very little design was really done. So we've referred to it tonight as sins of the past or inadequate designs. We've only become a community in the last 20 years, 25 years that really tried to design to standards, and those standards move. And we're all learning what the modern standards should be. So to try and quantify, as Charlie's suggestion, it is almost impossible. I don't know that you can put one number on it or even a series of numbers on it, and I really would hesitate to try and do that in any real definite way.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wainwright.
Well,
Go ahead, Mr.
and I very much appreciate the candidness, because that supports what Mr. Luling, Mr. Hankins suggested. We're not ready to implement these ordinances yet. But because one of and the reason I ask that is because in the earlier discussions, it was brought up that you comply with the CRS program. With the CRS program, if you read it, and believe it or not, I read it, and even they came out with a new one this year, that you have to be to some standards. So if you're complying with CRS, you have to have standards you're meeting. So I'll just leave it at that. You're not, you can't use the CRS to support your maintenance plan.
Can you tell me what that standard, I'll ask you a question. Can you tell me what the standard was on the CRS since you read it?
Yeah, what
what's
the
their
plan
standard?
says is that you have to have a stated plan. You have to have, is it a 2-year plan, or is it a 5-year plan, or whatever, and then you have to meet it. In order to meet those standards, it's very minimal.
All right.
It says you got to take the couches out of the ditch, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. They're just, the standards are, they want to know that you're paying attention to the drainage.
All right.
Okay?
Mr. Atherton.
there's two different things I believe you're asking. One of them, well, the first thing that came out was, do you have a standard? Now you're saying, do you have a minimum standard? Which one is it? Which one do you want us to have?
I want to know what, right now, you're moving to where people have to comply with a 25-year standard, right? Isn't that the direction we're moving?
In the subdivision.
On a detention pond only.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, detention bond. Just the detention bond, not our ditch.
But not the drainage lateral, well, what standards, will the drainage laterals, the drainage system in the parish has got to be built to what standard?
All right, go ahead, Mr.
I mean, what does the ordinance say now? I mean, what is it now and what does the ordinance say? And I appreciate what you said, it's in flux, but under the new drainage ordinances, to put a drainage lateral in, what standard does that have to be to?
All right, go ahead, Mr.
So just to
Wainwright.
go quickly, there are all the minimum standards are established in the ordinance. That's why you have the ordinances. So drainage laterals move from major to minor on a scale based on how many acres they serve. Based on that designation, there is a minimum design standard. So the more acres served, the higher the design standard. In our case, over 300 acres is the largest. That's your 25-year design standard. So if there was a new lateral built, or as we go through and improving laterals, that'll be the goal. And again, that's the same standards that are applied to new construction, same reasoning. That's a more critical component, you use a higher standard. That's just standard engineering practices throughout the country.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Wainwright.
so what are the parish road ditches? What is the standard for road ditches?
Yes, Sam, you got the
Yeah,
floor.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just comment real quick. This is a public comment period. It's a time for everybody to come up and make comments. It's not a time to debate things on the floor like this. It's not a question and answer session. You got to come prepared to make your comments. Questions like that need to be answered before the meeting. I don't want to be the one to interrupt debate like this, but it's really just a comment period.
Well, what's the venue? I did FOIA request, I didn't get all the
Hey, please speak
information. When do
directly
I,
to
as
the
the
committee.
landowner, have an opportunity to,
Mr. Atherton, ask
Yes.
directly to the committee, please.
yes.
So go ahead, you still got about 3 minutes, so just let's make your comments. We want to make sure you,
Yes, sir, and I appreciate your.
No problem.
I appreciate your understanding. I can tell you what the public wants, is they want the parish drained. They don't want the water spread out where the only direction it has to go is up. They're really looking forward to the parish having a parish-wide master drainage plan that that includes detailed maintenance, and it also addresses the title issue. Because West Calcasieu, without addressing the title issue, I mean, you're basically the ordinances is perceived as trying to set the water level or control the water level in the ship channel and the lake by these ordinances. We would, and when you read through the ordinances, you get the feeling that it basically, there's a lot of places where you get the feeling the parish is preserving its right to make it up as it goes along without whatever rules or regulations they want to implement, they're not really based on anything specific. It's just whatever the parish deems is necessary. The one thing that I would personally like to see you change is what the APG mentioned was the slope of the ditches. I think it was 4 to 1 you require. 3 to 1 is more than enough. So, and that's a lot of real estate and a lot of ground, because the people perceive these ordinances as basically taking people's real estate from them for drainage, but they don't get compensated for it. But I guess at this point, I would like to ask that Mr. Andervont make a motion to support the recommendations and the changes that the APG has suggested. that you delay this until you got a master plan and you implement the reasonable request that Mr. Hankins just made.
All right, you got about 30 seconds to wrap up any comments you got left. I'm
I
gonna give you
need to
30 more
thank you for
seconds.
your time and your service and ask you to defer.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. All right, do we have anyone? That's all?
Yeah, we got one
Oh,
more.
Mr. Flavin.
Flavin.
Name and address, please, sir.
Tim Flavin, 3221 Ryan Street, Lake Charles. It was good to finally see maintenance and infrastructure on a slide here tonight after going back and forth for as long as we have. But I think I'd rather see it, as I stated in the last meeting that we were here, to have that maintenance and infrastructure tied to the ordinance. And the 17 million that was spoken about is in a future budget that has not been approved yet. And also to challenge you as police jurymen to think about 17 million when our city of Lake Charles just passed a 7 million for just the city of Lake Charles. And 17 million, I think in prior action, 6 million of that 17 million is going to be used up in one retention area. So just to remind the police jury that it's your budget that you approve, and it is set forth by staff, that we are so far behind on what we need to be doing on infrastructure, and want to challenge you to make sure that that we increase that 17 million and to tie it to this ordinance. As part of, I know there's a delay of 6 months or whatever, and you're going to approve the ordinance, and that's great, but to make sure that maintenance and infrastructure is tied to this ordinance, because if it is not, maintenance and infrastructure won't be done. And to try to get some of the clarification, and I appreciate Mr. Landry saying where, in this ordinance, it's up to you where to put that money. If we are charging the public for a drainage fee, then the money should be used towards drainage. I was at the dump out there on Highway 90 and saw 4 brand new red pickup or brand new dump trucks that were in the shed and on the yard out there, and I'm thinking, man, it wouldn't be nice if those trucks were working. It was in the middle of the day or whatever, so I guess we didn't have anything to use them on. But my point is to make sure that we are putting money towards infrastructure and not thinking that our problems are going to go away. So challenge you to look at that budget and make sure that that we're putting as much money as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flavin. All right, we do have final.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed changes to Chapter 26 to the full police jury.
Would any other comments for the jury, from the committee first? I have a motion to approve to move forward with the report, with the proposed Chapter 26 Code of Ordinance, and I have a second by Mr. McMillan, but we still have a few comments. Any jurors would like to speak? All right, Mr. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The comments I'm fixing to make are mine and mine only. There's been a lot of dialogue in the last few months on this issue, and as I appreciate it, there's a lot of people who are still disenchanted with the verbiage or the language that's been adopted eventually by this committee and full body of the police jury at some point in time in the near future. I'm sure that in listening tonight, the comments were made by Tim and Charlie and those that they don't feel like it's necessary to move at this time to move forward with it. While I'm sure there are flaws in the presented ordinance, there are certainly flaws in the Constitution of the United States of America. It's all a matter of interpretation of how you want to interpret this document or how you want to interpret the Constitution. At some point in time, we have got to take a stand and move forward. I know some of you are not gonna like what I'm fixing to say, and I respect that. But we are charged with an issue here that we have to make a decision on. Now, the terminology three-legged stool was used in some of the dialogue in the past. It was alluded to. 8 people run this parish, whether you like that or not, you dislike it. That's just a matter of fact. Anything or any document that this police jury adopts can be adopted, changed, or rejected. Now, there's enough common sense in this room to know that if we adopt this document and it's not working to the exact perfection that we thought it would, no reason in the world for us not to come back and look at it again. Admit if the changes are worthy of being changed, then I think that this body has enough common sense to know that that's exactly what we're going to do. And all I'm saying to you is this, that I appreciate your concerns. I appreciate what Ralph had to say. I appreciate what Tim and Charles, all of you had very valid points of what you're trying to make. But I think the time has to come that we have got to adopt what staff has recommended to this committee to bring to the full body. Now, once we bring it to the full body, what's going to happen then, I don't have a clue. All I'm saying to you is that we have to trust somebody and we have to have a benchmark to shoot from. So I would ask that those of you who have legitimate concerns to be patient with the committee and staff. And if some of the things that are adopted tonight are not working, I assure you that I will be one of the first people to step up to the plate and say that needs to be readdressed. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and if you have any questions for me after the meeting, I'd be glad to stay and work with you. Thank you, sir.
Any final comments? With that, I do have a motion and a second to move this forward to the Planning and Zoning Board as presented for the Chapter 26 Code of Ordinance. All in favor? Any opposed? What?
It's really a move it toward to the police jury. You said planning and zoning. Just
Oh, they're gonna hear it tomorrow?
No,
They just,
they're gonna
oh,
have,
they're gonna hear it, they don't have to do anything.
They don't have to do anything with it.
This committee makes the recommendation and moves toward the police jury.
That'll work too. So we are gonna move this to the full police jury on, what's the date? November 16th. All in favor? We'll take that. No opposed. With that, the motion carries. Any other matters before the?
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion and a
You
second.
did,
Move to
Dennis.
adjourn.